right up here on your TV screen to sort of jog your memory, okay? Now, if it should fall down, will you please make your own note to replace it? Or better still, send in your contribution. Thanks.
Good evening, I'm Robert MacNeil in New York. After tonight's news summary, we'll preview a major flashpoint between the incoming Republican Congress and the White House, cutting U.S. foreign aid. Correspondent Tom Bearden reports on a high-stakes rail chase. Charlene Hunter-Galt takes a second look at the scourge of the streets, kids killing kids. And essayist Ann Taylor Fleming closes with a gift for all.
Funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. With ADM ingredients in thousands of consumer products, it's no wonder ADM is called Supermarket to the World. And by New York Life, yet another example of the wise investment philosophy New York Life has been following for the last 150 years. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
The hijacking drama of an Air France jetliner ended this afternoon in a bloody assault by French commandos. All four hijackers were killed. 24 police and passengers suffered injuries. But in the end, most of the remaining hostages on board were rescued unharmed. The ordeal began Saturday when a group of Islamic extremists seized the plane in Algiers and forced it to fly to Marseille early this morning. We have more in this report narrated by Richard Vaughn of Worldwide Television News.
After 13 hours on the Marseille tarmac, the elite French commandos moved in. The high-risk operation was shown live on French television as the troops waged a 10-minute gun battle with the hijackers. A deadline for the plane to refuel and leave for Paris had come and gone quietly during the day. But it was not to stay that way. Later in the afternoon, the hijackers killed their fourth victim. That appears to have been the trigger for the commandos to move in. The special forces who carried out the action are experienced in this kind of commando attack. Having conducted over 650 operations against guerrillas, hostage situations, and prison riots, the force was well versed in trying to minimize the injuries. Once the troops were battling the hijackers, passengers and crew alike jumped to safety. 4 hijackers were killed in the attack, and 9 of the elite troops were injured. One who had his hand blown off is in a serious condition. 3 crew were also wounded, and 13 passengers suffered from bruises and shock.
The 2-day-old ceasefire in Bosnia seems to be holding throughout much of that country, but there have been scattered reports of fighting in the Bihać area. The Muslim-led Bosnian government has threatened to resume its offensive if the incursions by Croatian Serbs don't stop. After 3 weeks of bloodshed in the breakaway Republic of Chechnya, Russian forces may be preparing to pull back from the besieged capital. President Yeltsin said today the first phase of the military operation there is over, and he offered to hold talks with Chechen officials. We have more in this report from Julian Mannion of Independent Television News.
This morning, the first sign that Russian resolve on the Chechen crisis may possibly be starting to crack. At an emergency meeting of the National Security Council, President Boris Yeltsin declared that his government is approaching the moment when the military presence in Chechnya can be wound up. Then, in a remark whose full meaning is not yet clear, Yeltsin said that Russian military units will be withdrawn to temporary positions still inside Chechnya. The president said that the process of installing a legal administration in Chechnya would soon begin, but he made no public reference to the fact that the Chechen capital is still in the hands of the separatists. With General Dudayev's volunteers firmly dug in despite the bombing, it is uncertain how President Yeltsin now expects his order to restore Russian rule to be implemented. Russian rhetoric is becoming divorced from the reality on the ground. This weekend, the Russians claim to have killed 1,000 Chechen militants in heavy fighting at the town of Argun near Grozny. But the latest reports from the spot indicate that there has been no fighting since Saturday and that the Chechens are still firmly in control, having suffered minor losses. The real meaning of today's statement is not yet clear, but it may be that the Russians are trying to conceal their growing uncertainty behind a barrage of propaganda. President Yeltsin has promised to give the Russian people full information when he addresses them tomorrow.
The Clinton administration announced that a State Department envoy will leave for North Korea this evening to negotiate the release of an American Army pilot. Bobby Hall has been held since December 17th when his helicopter was shot down after it strayed into North Korean territory. His crewmate, David Heilman, was killed. Late today, the official North Korean news agency called the overflight a spy mission requiring further investigation. English playwright John Osborne has died of heart failure. In the 1950s, Osborne led a post-war revolution in British theater with such plays as Look Back in Anger and The Entertainer. His collection of prose, called Damn You, England, was published this year. Osborne was 65. Italian singer and actor Rossano Brazzi has also died. His most famous role was in the 1958 classic South Pacific, one of the 200 movies he made. Brazzi died of a virus in Rome. He was 78. That's it for the news summary. Now it's on to a battle over giving, running a railroad, stopping the violence, and why we worship. First tonight, a looming battle between the White House and Capitol Hill. Margaret Warner got a preview when she led this debate last week.
For years, there have been calls inside and outside Congress to reform the American foreign aid program. Now, with Congress about to fall under Republican control, debate has intensified over whether and how foreign aid will survive. We'll have our own debate right after this background. America's foreign aid program began when President Truman offered assistance to post-World War II Europe, help that included the Marshall Plan.
I recommend that the Congress speedily complete its action on the European Recovery Program. That program is the foundation of our policy of assistance to the free nations of Europe.
That program was soon followed by others for Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. For most of the past 50 years, American foreign aid was driven by Cold War concerns. It was designed, above all, to check the spread of communism. Of the $436 billion spent on foreign aid since 1946, two-thirds went for military help to countries that the U.S. felt were threatened by communist neighbors or internal rebel movements. The balance went to humanitarian and development projects, feeding the hungry, building schools and hospitals, and extending emergency relief to refugees and disaster victims. But foreign policy goals have always been at the forefront of deciding which countries got aid. Nearly half of each year's foreign aid budget, for example, has gone to Israel and Egypt since they signed the Camp David peace accords in 1979. And major new recipients in this post-Cold War era are Russia and the other former republics of the Soviet Union. The United States actually ranks last among all donor nations in the percentage of gross national product it allocates to overseas assistance. The foreign aid budget for fiscal 1994 was $12.3 billion, with about half of that going to economic and development aid. According to the Agency for International Development, which administers much of this aid, that amounts to 0.5% of the total U.S. budget. By another reckoning, foreign aid costs the average tax-paying family $44 per year. Yet foreign aid has been and remains one of the most controversial government spending programs. Critics in and out of Congress attack it as an ineffective giveaway. Now the incoming Republican chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Jesse Helms, vows a new, even tougher look at foreign aid.
I think we ought to replace it with something that does not willy-nilly give away United States taxpayers' money to foreign governments who are opposed to us, or at least opposed to civil rights and all the rest of it.
In recent weeks, other members of Congress have joined Helms in urging a reduction in U.S. foreign aid. Now for views. Brian Atwood heads the U.S. Agency for International Development, or AID. Catherine Gwynn is vice president of the Overseas Development Council, a Washington think tank that deals with development issues. Alan Keyes is an adjunct fellow at the Heritage Foundation, a Washington think tank, and also a syndicated columnist and radio talk show host. A former Foreign Service officer, he was an Assistant Secretary of State in the Reagan administration. And Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, is the incoming chairman of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee that handles foreign aid. He has drafted a foreign aid bill for next year that would cut foreign assistance, revamp the way it's given, and abolish AID altogether. He joins us from Louisville. Senator McConnell, what is wrong with the way U.S. foreign aid is dispensed right now, in your view?
Well, I think essentially, Margaret, we need to quit subsidizing failure abroad. And a good rule of thumb might be if it's a project that we wouldn't consider funding here at home, we certainly ought not to fund it overseas. We need to get away from sort of treating the symptoms of poverty and start dealing with the cure. And the cure is clearly the free enterprise system. We know that that is the only thing that will certainly lift people out of poverty. We know that works. And I'd like to quit subsidizing failure abroad, and that's essentially the concept embodied in the new foreign aid bill that I unveiled a week or two ago.
So you would target your aid to countries, what, that simply, that promised or did pursue free market economies?
The first priority would be America's national interest abroad, and I find those national interests, and I think most Americans do, in the Middle East and in what used to make up the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. There we have a clear national interest, I think arguably a national security interest, and particularly with regard to the former Soviet republics in preventing the reemergence of the Russian Empire. But away from those two areas of geopolitical significance to us, the fundamental underpinning for funding anywhere else in the world, it seems to me, ought to be trade. I would actually increase funding for the Trade Development Administration and for the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, actually increase that funding. But I would take away a sort of guaranteed earmark. For example, the continent of Africa has had a sort of perpetual earmark of about $800 million. I don't think there ought to be an earmark for them or for any other part of the world where we do not have a clear national security interest. There would be a residual pool of funds up to $3 billion unearmarked that countries in Africa and countries outside of Africa that have basically made no progress could still compete for. But I would want to target that assistance in a way that guaranteed some results. And we know we're only going to get results when we try to encourage the spread of capitalism.
Mr. Atwood, what do you make of that criticism that basically U.S. foreign aid has been essentially subsidizing failure?
Well, I think there was some merit to that criticism. We've tried to change the program in the last couple of years. We have moved out of 23 countries, several of which would fall in that category. Indeed, we had been subsidizing failure. They were non-performers. Their government policies did not support development, so we moved out. We've reformed the program significantly in the last few years, and I'm not that far apart from what Senator McConnell is saying. We would agree. We've reduced the program by 20%. That's very significant given that we were already the lowest contributor to foreign aid in the world as a percentage of our GNP. So we're not that far apart in terms of where we want to go. There is more to economic growth than just supporting the economic policy reforms that Senator McConnell wants. If you have rapid population growth, you're going to have a problem sustaining economic growth. If you have environmental degradation, you're going to have the same problem. And if you have weak governance, you will have that problem. We think that's all part of a comprehensive approach to development that will work to defend American interests.
Ms. Gwynn, which of these two views that you've just heard best expresses your own? In other words, where do you think the emphasis ought to be in U.S. foreign aid?
I suppose Mr. Atwood's views express mine most closely, but I'm interested in how much common ground there you may have just heard between the first two speakers. You heard Mr. Atwood say that he's already moved in the direction of making reforms in the program. These are changes that are possible in a post-Cold War world. Let's not forget that prior to the end of the Cold War, much of the objective for U.S. foreign aid was the pursuit of that issue, and much of our aid was directed to countries not because they were making effective development efforts, but because they were allies of ours in the Cold War. And so for a period of time, for example, in the decade of the 80s, the four largest aid recipients in Africa were Sudan, Somalia, Liberia, and Ethiopia, I believe. These were countries who were important to us on geopolitical grounds, or said to be important on those grounds, and aid was given largely for those reasons. If we measure the effectiveness of the aid given to those countries against development criteria, we have a problem. We're no longer constrained in that way, and we can be more selective in the allocation of aid to specific countries. And I think that's what Mr. Atwood has said he agrees with, and in fact, the way the program is moving now.
Mr. Keyes, do you agree with Senator McConnell's assessment that aid should be targeted, A, either at countries in which we have a strategic interest, or B, for the rest of the countries, then it should strictly be a sort of a competition, and which ones are kind of trying to turn themselves into the economic models that we agree with?
I would say that the basic principle is in fact correct. Foreign assistance shouldn't be looked upon as some kind of charity program, since of course the contributions made to it are not voluntary, they are tax money. And tax money should serve clear and overriding public purposes in its use, and that means it should be tied to a policy purpose and a policy result that we've thought through and can clearly identify. That implies, of course, that you're using your foreign assistance in the context of a clearly thought out strategy as to what the United States is trying to achieve in the world. So there's a foreign policy requirement to begin with that then allows foreign assistance to be effective. I would say that at one level, one of the things I think we are not doing well right now in any of this is adjusting to the reality of the post-Cold War period, in which if you look around at the different things we've been engaged with in the world, a lot of them are not just country-specific, they're also due to the failure of regions to deal with their problems. And I think one of the things we need to start looking at is whether or not, in terms of the residual funds that Senator McConnell talks about, the ones that aren't directly tied to an identifiable U.S. security interest, we don't have to start looking at ways in which we develop the ability of different regions of the world to have countries working cooperatively on both their economic and their security problems. The bilateral nature of a lot of our assistance, government to government, in ways that sometimes subsidizes the worst kind of government policies, I think is something we need seriously to review.
You just said, though, that this is not a charity program, but let me ask you this question in the Christmas season. Do you think that as the world's richest country, the United States has any obligation, just a purely altruistic one, to help other countries financially?
As individuals, I believe we can have obligations to act on a charitable basis. The money that is given to the United States government is not given for charitable purposes, and I think it's a mistake to try to justify it on those grounds. I would consider it more like the kind of money that businesses spend doing public relations and community relations. It does produce good results in the community, but the aim is to facilitate doing business in that community. It's not just charity. And that allows you to know when you're being effective, and it allows you also to continue bearing that cost, even when sometimes it constrains your budget a little bit, because you know charity, for instance, is something we usually do out of our surplus, because we don't consider it part of our natural expenses. Whereas if it's a cost of doing business, you might cut it, but you won't eliminate it if it's producing a result.
Mr. Atwood, where do you come down on that question, whether we have a responsibility, just as the world's richest country, to help other countries, even if there's no self-interest?
Well, there's a humanitarian aspect to this. When we have refugees flowing out of countries like Rwanda, Somalia, President Bush sent our military in along with AID to help feed people. So there's a humanitarian aspect that is strongly supported by the American people. But what I'm worried about, frankly, is that we're spending a lot more money on handling these kinds of disasters than we are in investing in preventing them. We have a real need to try to deal with conditions that cause the Rwandas and the Somalias. Now, Senator McConnell has expressed some skepticism that this has worked. Now, I agree. We have not invested, we have not organized properly, and I'm not just talking about the United States government, I'm talking about the entire international community to try to deal with the conditions that create crises. We must do it. It's not enough when an arson is going around burning houses in a neighborhood to say, let's use a fire hose here. Let's strengthen the fire department. What we've got to do is to get the arson. What we've got to do is to deal with the cause, the root causes of these problems.
Senator McConnell, let me ask you about that particular point, namely that if all we do is come in after the fact, that it ends up being much, much more expensive, and that money can and should be spent to prevent the Rwandas and Somalias before they're such expensive disasters that we have to help fix.
Well, Margaret, the root cause is the absence of capitalism, the absence of governmental reform that brings about a free enterprise system. That's the root cause. We don't have enough money to eradicate human need abroad, although when there is an emergency situation, even I, who am very skeptical about anything working beyond the free enterprise system, even I would maintain, still maintain an earmark for both disaster assistance and for refugee assistance in the reform bill that I proposed, which would eliminate my friend Brian Atwood's agency. So I think there is a place for emergency assistance when that occurs, but I disagree with Brian that the way to avoid the emergency developing is the kind of preventive treatment that we've been engaging in. I think the kind of preventive activity that will avoid the disaster is free enterprise. And I think that our expenditures ought to be selectively targeted only at those countries that are willing to reform, to privatize, and begin to grow their own free enterprise systems, because that's the only thing that will work. Anything else is a waste of money.
Ms. Gwynn, can you point to any major successes in the foreign aid program that have prevented these disasters, potential Rwandas, from developing? In other words, in trying to figure out who's right here between Senator McConnell and Mr. Atwood, are there success stories where foreign aid was targeted in such a way as it prevented a disaster?
Margaret, I think in answering that question, it helps to take a reasonably long historical look at the question and remember that there are countries who are now some of our fastest growing markets, some of our strongest allies in the world, who were our major aid recipient countries only 20 years ago. South Korea and Chile are just two examples of countries who were major aid recipients and who have, in fact, made the economic reforms, made the economic developments, dealt with improving the well-being of their populations, broadly speaking, and who represent successes in the world, not strictly because of foreign aid, but foreign aid was an element in their history over the last 20 years.
Let me get Mr. Keyes to comment on that. Is that
well, I would just say, I mean, my memory could be faulty, but I think we had phased out most of our foreign assistance to Korea by the time you get into the early 60s. But, and that a lot of the growth spurt of Korea occurred between 60 and 85 and was not much influenced by any foreign assistance from the United States. It was driven, in effect, by a willingness to start up and adhere to free market principles and to base one's effort to develop on the understanding that you had to develop a robust economy in order to trade with other nations. And I think that that's what Senator McConnell is talking about. We've got to look at the models that have worked, and they haven't been driven by development assistance or basic needs approaches. They've been driven by the need to develop free enterprise in such a way that you can have a solid economic foundation based on productivity and trade.
So are you saying, in other words, that in your opinion, foreign aid has never served a useful purpose?
I wouldn't say that. I think if you define the purpose of foreign aid, as I think it is rightly to be understood, as a way of helping to facilitate our efforts to do business in the world, diplomatically, in terms of trade and other things, I think it has served a purpose. It has served a purpose in developing contacts and maintaining relationships with other countries and governments.
But I mean for the other countries.
But in terms of development assistance, I would say that especially if you do it on balance, there is not a good case to be made that our development assistance has on balance done more good than harm. I think it's probably the other way around.
You've been trying to get back in. Yes.
I'd just like to make a comment on that because, I mean, I don't have any difference with Alan Keyes or Senator McConnell on the question of wanting to achieve free enterprise systems, but how do you think these things happen? They don't just happen because someone reads Adam Smith's book and all of a sudden declares that we're going to have policies. They happen because you look at the human capacity within the society, you educate people, you strengthen governmental institutions so that they serve the purpose of a free economic system and that they create markets. And that's what our foreign aid program does. And what I'm really fearful of right now as we move into the new Congress is that there are people who do not take the same position as Senator McConnell or Alan Keyes with respect to foreign aid, who I think are truly isolationist, who don't want us out there helping to develop new markets for American goods. I'm very concerned about that, and I'm concerned that in the first 100 days this is going to be swept away and that the reasonable constructive criticism that people like Senator McConnell put forward is going to be lost in a dynamic that we can't control.
Now, Mr. Atwood, Senator McConnell wants to wipe out your agency altogether and send it to the State Department. Are you comfortable with that?
Look, no, of course I'm not comfortable with that. Why would I be? But let me just tell you something. More is at stake here than the existence of a bureaucracy. I'm not defending foreign aid because of a bureaucracy. I think that Senator McConnell is aware of the reforms that we've made inside AID. It is a model for management. What is really important is the effectiveness of our ability to deliver these programs and our ability to tell Senator McConnell what results we've achieved with our programs. So AID is not the issue here. It's the role of the United States in the international community and the ability of the United States to lead other donors to do what we think is right to create a stable world environment.
Senator McConnell, let me ask you, do you agree with Ms. Gwynn that there's really a lot of common ground between yourself and Brian Atwood in terms of where foreign aid should be moving?
Well, I think Brian Atwood has done the best job he could with an outmoded agency that ought to be eliminated. I am a supporter of foreign assistance. I think we ought to continue to have a foreign assistance program. I think it principally ought to support our national interests, because I think aid and interest ought to be indispensable. Right now what we've got is an agency, AID, which exists in splendid isolation, which dispenses aid which may or may not also be in our interests. I think we can't afford that luxury any longer. I think Brian has done the best job he can with this dinosaur, but I think it's time to put it to rest and to create a new model within the State Department, clearly oriented toward our foreign policy interests, and slim it down some.
So, in other words, your interest really is in revamping the way it's done, less saving money.
Well, I want to do both. I want to do both.
But how much would you really cut it?
Overall, I would cut it at least 10%. Outside of the Middle East and what used to be the Soviet Union, I would cut it at least 20%.
Well, Senator McConnell and Mr. Atwood, Ms. Gwynn and Mr. Keyes, I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but thanks very much.
Thank you.
Still to come on the NewsHour, riding the rails, ending violence, and finding the answers. Now a story about 3 railroads, 2 courtships, and 1 rejection. Tom Bearden reports.
The great railroads cast a long shadow over the American economy. Coal, grain, chemicals, lumber. The big commodity shippers, where the railroads still do most of their business, are affected by every turn and tremor of the industry they can't live without. When the country's 2 biggest railroads are frantically chasing a third, like what's happening now with the Burlington Northern and the Union Pacific pursuing the Santa Fe, it's more than just a routine business merger. Justin Zubrod with the management consulting firm A.T. Kearney thinks it's the beginning of the final shakeout of the industry.
Sort of the logical next step, whereas when you looked at the railroad mergers during the 1980s, most of them were driven by cost efficiencies and so forth. These are driven by expanding the network, building a franchise, and gaining access to new markets.
Shakeouts of one sort or another have been going on since railroads were created. 100 years ago, railroads dominated the development of industrial America. They were the largest enterprises of their time. Eventually, they became so powerful that the federal government acted to rein in their excesses by forming the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887. It began a government-industry dance that was to last 93 years. Decline began to set in the 1950s. Trucks running on the new interstate highway system began to skim off the most profitable freight, leaving the railroads to haul lower-profit commodities. The railroads were slow to respond, and they began to fail. Great names like the Penn Central disappeared into bankruptcy. Dick Davidson is chairman and CEO of the Union Pacific.
We had an inward focus. We focused on running trains. We didn't focus on the customer, and we didn't focus on the car. To try to distinguish it, we used to worry a lot if a train left Chicago or Omaha and got to California on time. We didn't worry if it had the right cars or if it was delivered to the customer at the right time, but if we got that train there, we were doing fine. It might not be the time the customer wanted the train to run. We didn't give a hang about that.
Railroads, as a living, breathing industry, began to fade from the public consciousness. People began to think about them as quaint anachronisms, nostalgic reminders of the past, if they thought about them at all. But while most Americans ignored railroads, the government was turning them upside down. In 1980, President Carter signed the Staggers Act, giving railroads the freedom to set most of their own rates for the first time. It touched off a frenzy of reform and rebuilding. Many roads merged. Unprofitable routes were abandoned. The workforce was slashed. Sophisticated new communication systems were introduced
that allowed a few dispatchers to control an entire railroad from one location. Aaron Gelman runs the Transportation Center at Northwestern University.
It's done wonders for the railroad industry. It's allowed them to do things they couldn't do before, but it's also galvanized them competitively in ways that they weren't before. I mean, we see, for example, that railroad productivity is up 140% in labor terms. Employment is down 40%. Traffic is up in terms of ton miles. Rates are down in real terms. It's just a remarkable achievement on the part of the railroads, which I think they deserve very high marks for.
But Santa Fe CEO Robert Krebs says there is much left to do.
Right now it's crazy. Santa Fe can handle traffic from Chicago to Los Angeles, 2,200 miles, in 48 hours. Sometimes it takes 48 hours just to get a car 40 miles from one side of Chicago to another when you interchange it with carriers. And that's the horse and buggy days. That has got to stop.
In the 80s, Santa Fe began to work more closely with the truckers and became a big presence in so-called intermodal shipping, where sealed containers move from truck beds to train cars for the long haul, then back to trucks for final delivery. This summer, Santa Fe agreed to a friendly merger with the Burlington Northern, a railroad that does a lot of business in bulk commodities. They ship coal to power plants and grain from the Farm Belt to urban markets. Santa Fe's routes run from the Midwest to the Southwest. The Burlington Northern lines follow a more northerly route on their way west. To both sides, it seemed like a good match. But another suitor for Santa Fe was waiting in the wings. Omaha-based Union Pacific Railroad also connects the Midwest with the Far West, but UP's planners felt that their routes to Southern California were less direct. A few weeks after the Burlington-Santa Fe merger was announced, UP made its own hostile bid for the Santa Fe. Both companies say their opponent's proposal will lessen competition and will be rejected by the Interstate Commerce Commission, which must approve any merger. Doug Babb is general counsel for the Burlington.
It's like Goliath becoming Samson in a way, because the Union Pacific already has the dominant system in the West. They're already in every market. They're already a very strong competitor. And for Union Pacific to acquire Santa Fe is going to result in a lot of reduction of competition.
The truth of the matter is, the Burlington Northern is a bigger railroad than we are in terms of miles today. Quite a bit bigger, 5,000 or 6,000 miles larger. So, you know, if we're a Goliath, hopefully it's because we're doing a good job of running the company. It's not because that we were inherently a larger company or our revenues were a lot bigger.
Each railroad points to places where its rival's proposal would create overlapping routes.
Are parts of their proposal anti-competitive?
Well, it could be, surely. They have routes as well, as an example, between Denver and Texas, where their rail lines will go from 2 to 1.
It's simply not true. Between Denver and Texas, there are 3 major competitors today. There's the Santa Fe system, the Union Pacific system, and the Burlington Northern system.
The Burlington says they fit better with the Santa Fe because it's more of an end-to-end merger, whereas the Union Pacific and the Santa Fe are direct competitors with a great deal of parallel track.
There are merits to all sides of the argument. Certainly both mergers or both petitions will result in some sort of disruptions, but net a tremendous advantage for the industry and for the shipping public as a whole.
But not all shippers are convinced. Ed Emmett runs the National Industrial Transportation League in Washington. They represent companies that do large volume shipping with trucks and railroads.
20 years ago, there were 70 some odd Class I railroads. Today there are 13. At every major merger along the way, shippers would say, well, it's not a big deal, but sooner or later there are going to be too few railroads. I don't know that 13 is too few. I don't know that 7 or 8, but somewhere there's a number. And so the pattern that's set by this major merger, I think, will affect those future mergers. And that's what concerns shippers.
Some shippers are worried that this merger and those that might follow could leave them at the mercy of a single railroad, which could then charge whatever the market would bear. But Burlington's Ron Rittenmeyer says today's marketplace is too diverse for that.
Well, if you stand back and look at many of the shippers, they have other options. There's barge traffic, there's truck traffic, there's other rail traffic. We are not going to be by ourselves in any major segment. All segments we will have some type of competition from other rail. There also is truck competition, and we fight truck competition every day. Railroads do not just compete with railroads. They compete with trucks. They compete in many segments with barge traffic, water traffic. Shippers will have options, and competition will not change.
Emmett says that's not true for all shippers.
The nature of railroads make railroads different than, say, other modes of transportation. If you don't like the truck firm that provides service, you call up another trucking firm and they come up the same highway. If you don't like the railroad that gives you service, you don't have that choice, because the odds are there's only one rail track outside your plant. And if you ship the kind of heavy equipment or bulk commodity that requires rail, then you are frequently captive to that railroad.
The final decision on a merger falls to the same agency that began regulating railroads a century ago, the ICC. Many think it may deal with the problem of reduced competition by ordering the winning railroad to let other roads run their trains over its tracks. The Union Pacific has already offered to do that as part of its merger proposal. Waves of railroad mergers have been going on since 1838. Many say the industry is on the verge of a new round, that whichever railroad loses out will search for a new partner. Other lines are expected to follow with mergers of their own. The U.S. could end up with 4 or 5 transcontinental railroads, and perhaps as few as 3 before this process, which began in 1980, reaches a new equilibrium.
Next tonight, teenage violence. Starting next month, public television, in cooperation with a coalition of private groups, will launch a multi-year effort to break the tragic cycle of youth violence in our society. Earlier this year, Charlene Hunter-Gault had a series of conversations with people who had some unusual ideas about solutions. This week, we thought it warranted a second look.
This is art, in a manner of speaking, a made-for-television movie about young people caught up in a vicious and inescapable cycle of violence. This is reality. A 3-year-old struck in the head and killed after teenagers fired 18 shots through his family's front door. An 11-year-old boy abducted, beaten, and set on fire by a 13-year-old police say tried to force him to smoke crack. A 15-year-old girl shot in the head while walking to school with friends. A 16-year-old was charged. These particular acts of violence occurred in New York City, but experts on juvenile violence say similar scenes are being played out in cities, suburbs, and even tiny towns all over the country. And all are struggling with the same dilemma: what to do about the small but growing number of violent young people. Stronger punishment is one rallying cry, an option that would see juveniles tried as young as 13 in adult courts. In a recent nationwide poll, 40% between the ages of 13 and 17 said they knew someone who had been shot in the past 5 years, and that both the victim and the attacker were teenagers.
I'm Teresa, and I'm just going to take you through the curriculum that we're going to be doing.
Some young people are fighting back, but not violently. Instead, they are confronting their fears and their emotions and training others to do the same. They're called peer leaders. As part of their summer vacations, about 200 of them met outside Boston for a series of violence prevention workshops. The 10-year-old peer leadership program is sponsored by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. The program uses techniques like role-playing to help teenagers find ways to avoid the pitfalls of such problems as drug abuse, teen pregnancy, and violence.
Excuse me.
Yes?
Who's this? What do you mean? Who are you?
The teenagers, most of whom have been touched by violence one way or another, say acting out real-life situations teaches them how to avoid confrontations that could quickly escalate into life-threatening situations. During a break, we talked with 4 of them. Teresa Job and Tanika Freeman, both 17 years old. 18-year-old Ron Tazinski, and 15-year-old Jose Pagan.
Thank you all for joining us. Each of you has been, in one way or another, dealing with violence in your lives, either as counselors or personally involved in some way in incidents. Can you just start by telling me briefly how violence has touched your life personally?
Well, I just lost a friend in February, and I knew him in the first grade. We met in the first grade. And like over the years, we kind of separated. He went to Southeastern and I went to Brockton High. And I didn't really know him, but when he got murdered, it kind of, it finally hit me. And the thing that bothered me the most is he wasn't bad at all. It was his friends.
And do you know many young people who have been victims of violence in your circles? A lot?
A lot, yeah. Around 20, yeah. Since 1990, between 1993 and this year so far, I'd say.
20 people?
Not dead, but, have been victims of violence, yeah.
Right.
One teenager got stabbed in the high school in Dartmouth. A nurse got shot in a cushion. And then there was a drive-by shooting not too far from my house, and I knew two of them.
There was like a couple of stabbing incidents in my school, and I haven't been personally affected in the sense that, I haven't lost any of my close friends, but I hear about it in, my friend, her friend getting shot or things like that.
Jose?
Well, I lost two friends in the past year. One was my record producer who was trying to cut an album, and then he got stabbed. He died. I was almost shot about 3 months ago. Somebody tried to kill me, and that's really like kind of what straightened me up. I was doing bad stuff, and I decided, to change my life because I didn't want to die.
What do we know about the kids that you come in contact with who are involved in violence?
They all, they all joined whatever they're doing to try and get more friends, try and get respect. They all want respect, but the thing is, they don't really got the respect. Whatever the weapon they got is the respect. If they got a gun, the bullet coming out of the gun got the respect. Just swinging a bat at somebody that got the respect. It ain't you that got the respect. It ain't you that people are scared of. It's the gun. It's the knife.
Is respect the main reason why kids?
Sometimes, but in a lot of cases, they're kind of forced into the stream. Maybe they're having problems at home, financial problems at home, and selling drugs may be the only way that they feel they can take care of that problem. And with selling drugs brings on the violence. So it doesn't always have to deal with respect.
Most of it today, most of the violence deals with respect. Most of it is props. You want to get your props. You don't want to be a sucker. Because once you get labeled a sucker, there's no turning back from it.
I see it as money. Definitely money. It's all about money nowadays.
Is it money because the young people come from poverty, come from poor homes?
Like my cousin, he was really poor, and I used to rob people with him.
You used to rob people with your cousin?
When we was little, yeah, we was little kids. We used to rob people with them, cause we was poor, we didn't have nothing, and when we wanted something, we just take it. We was like 12, 13 back then. We used to just rob people. He used to get a knife. We used to rob people. We never stabbed anyone, but we just scared people up, took their stuff.
But did your parents, you live with your mother and father?
I live with my mother and my stepfather.
And did they, in the home, try to teach you right from wrong?
See, what it is that people say, it's not your mother's fault, it's not your father's fault. It's you, it's you, it's you. It is your parents' fault in some areas, because the only reason you got that bad is because they weren't firm enough with you. If they had told you to stay in, if they had checked on you in your room to make sure you was in your room and you didn't sneak out, if they had whipped your butt every time that you got out of line, if they had told you you can't go out for the next 3 weeks because you did so and so. My father, I think if he didn't have the problems in the beginning with drugs and alcohol and being a drug dealer, I think that he would have been an all right guy because he was the firmest with me. I mean, whenever I went to visit him for a week or something, I mean, I remember he used to tell me to do something and I didn't do it, and he would, he would bust my tail, because he didn't play that, I did what he said when he said it.
Do you think that people who kill people with guns, young people, are mature, they know what they're doing?
They know what they're doing. They really know what they're doing. They know that a gun, all they gotta do is pull the trigger. They most of the time, well, not most of the time, some of the time they know exactly who they're going after.
You all talk to young people and you try to intervene, you try to get them to not be violent, to resolve issues in a different way. Tell me a little bit about that, and how do you get them to listen to you as you try to, without coming off as goody-goody?
Well, basically, from my standpoint, because I was with two groups. I was an advisor of one and I was a peer leader of another. And what we did is we'd go to the thing, we'd start a discussion, and we would listen to them. They'd come up with what they think is the problem with the teenagers, why they're doing the violence and stuff, and then we just facilitate it. And if somebody was to start, we'll say crying or something, they'd go out of the room. One of us would go out, talk to them. So it's basically like we're kind of like, you can say, kind of like counseling, but we're not, because we're not, certified to do it.
But you just let them talk.
We just let them talk, and they get everything off their chest, what they want to say.
Is it easier to talk to younger kids, or do the people who are your same age, will they listen to you?
I think that if you're the same age group, they're more so apt to listen to you because they feel that you know more so where they're coming from. I think that they need a sense of hope and to be strong. A lot of times they feel that they can't say no or they can't get themselves out of certain situations.
I think in my experience, it's definitely easier to talk to younger kids because I feel like they look up to me and it's easier for them to talk to me. And just to let them know that, I'm out there and people are out there and we actually care and we want to listen to you. That's been my experience. It's harder for me to talk to kids my own age because they feel like, I'm not out there, I'm from a different situation and I'm not, I don't carry guns or I'm not a violent person.
Can you give me any specific example that you can think of where you've intervened in the way that you talk about, pointing out this isn't cool or whatever, however you do it, that's made a difference?
Well, I break up a lot of fights because I'm always walking around places. And if I see a fight start to break out, even if I don't know the people, sometimes it's embarrassing. But I just walk up to
probably.
people. Oh yeah, you can get stabbed in the middle or something. I broke up a few fights, downtown. I just walk. I just seen people started to fight. I was shopping. Just put my bags down, walked over, and try to hold them back and talk to them. Not looking like a nerd and nothing like can't we all just get along and But I go up to them, and I speak to them like a normal. We're not goody two shoes. We're not nerds. We go clubbing. We do everything a normal teen does. We just don't choose to get in trouble or do drugs or anything.
What do young people want from adults? What kind of help can society provide to help this problem of violence?
Just support us, and get involved. And another thing is
get involved.
Get involved in what we do. If we have if a youth group has a rally, the adults. We would like to see the adults there supporting us, supporting what we for.
Have fun with your kids at their early age because they grow up so. We grew up so fast. I wish when I was little, my mother took me, out to the zoo and did all them little, even if it's like every Sunday afternoon, y'all do something together.
Tanika?
I think they should volunteer. A lot of places have to close down because they're short-staffed, and it's just important for them to show the support, kill all the stereotypes,
What do you mean kill the stereotypes?
I feel that a lot of adults, they look towards certain kinds of youth. I'm going to say African-American youth because that's more so what I identify with. They look to them as, like the lost generation, the extinct species. But yet, can you have a little hope You know, because when the adults start thinking that way, the youth start thinking that way. And it's because, you know, adults, a lot of youth look up to adults as role models. And if your role model is saying, you know, well, you know, the young black male, they're dying every day. Yeah, they're dying every day, but what can you do to keep them from dying?
Like you said about the lost generation. I heard it said yesterday when the teenagers were saying we ain't the lost generation. We're actually the new generation. We are the generation that's gonna keep this world going. We're gonna be the generation that's gonna lift the world up, lift the United States up to where it should be. You know, there's a lot of crime and stuff, but now everything's getting better. There's a lot of groups out there, like us, for example. All of us are in affiliated groups. There's a lot of those groups that are building up.
Well, Teresa, Ron, Tanika, and Jose, thank you all for joining us.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Finally tonight, essayist Ann Taylor Fleming on the power of prayer.
It is a thing people do every day, everywhere. One of those things by which we know ourselves to be human. Needful, hopeful, frightened. One of those things as elemental for them as eating or working. Spin a globe or scan a map and put your finger down anywhere, north, south, east, west, and somebody will be doing it there, right then and there under your finger, whatever the time of day or night, whatever the season. Somebody will be praying. Alone or in amphitheaters, in tears or with laughter, in reverential stillness or with song and dance, with heads bowed or faces raised to the heavens. It is a universal act with no universal language, no universal posture, no universal place, no universal faith. I rarely think this much about prayer. No doubt I'm doing it now in part because of the season, and hymns and angels abound, and in part because of all the renewed haggling over the issue of school prayer. But prayer seems to me bigger and wider and more hopeful, more human, and more elemental than all of the haggling we'll inevitably do about it in the coming months. At least that's what occurs to me in my Christmas sentimentality. I hear Ave Maria, or the Gregorian chants I so love, and see the spill of supplicants all over the world, those who celebrate Christmas and those who do not. In churches, yes, but in mosques and synagogues and temples, and I confess to a pronounced spiritual shiver that transcends individual faiths. Although I am not per se religious, I, like millions of others, put in my time on a hard wooden Presbyterian pew as a small girl in hat and gloves, and later moved away from any organized church. But all through the years, like many people who have no formal faith, I have importuned somebody or something for help or forgiveness. Perhaps I'm just calling on some higher power, as they say in the 12-step world. Or perhaps I'm just importuning my own better self to be kinder, wiser, stronger. Is this not prayer? Some I know would say no. But who are any of us to judge the worth of another's prayer, its contours, its piety? After all, Muslims, Buddhists, Catholics, Jews, and Protestants, and all the sects and denominations within, they all have their own prayers. It is the act that is shared. By the act itself, they are joined not only to each other, but to all who have gone before, all of our kind who have prayed to this God or that, prayed for rain and sun, for children to be born and loved ones not to die, for victory or humility or the release from grief, a long lineage of the marrying and burying and mourning and celebrating, all colors and creeds and races throughout history, all of us asking for favors, asking for forgiveness, asking that we not be alone here, please. In that sense, prayer is too big and too small, too private and too universal to be owned by anyone. In my hometown of Los Angeles, People from 140 different countries live together. Prayers come in all those languages and all their attendant faiths. And it is the extraordinary gift of my country that all those faiths are tolerated and welcomed, and that no one prayer is the official prayer, even now during Christmas time. I'm Ann Taylor Fleming.
Again, the major story of this Monday. Police stormed a hijacked Air France jetliner in Marseille after the terrorists murdered a fourth passenger. All 4 of the Islamic hijackers were killed. Nearly 170 passengers were rescued. That's the NewsHour for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Robert MacNeil. Good night.
Funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. With ADM ingredients in thousands of consumer products, it's no wonder ADM is called Supermarket to the World. And by New York Life, yet another example of the wise investment philosophy New York Life has been following for the last 150 years. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
Video cassettes of the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS. It's a secret ceremony high in the mountains of Peru. Every year, tens of thousands of people risk their lives to climb to the sanctuary in a glacier 16,000 feet above sea level. What they do there has been going on since ancient times, a celebration of a Christian miracle and something much older. It's the mystery of the return to the sacred ice, next time on Legendary Trails.
On OPB, tonight at 8.